Hi, welcome back to MileHighDiscussions. I'm Izzy, one of your hosts, and today we're having two guests.
Hi, I'm Griffin Bezek. I am a junior at East High School.
Sophia, I am a junior at East High School as well.
And my name is Hugh O'Bryan. I'm your other host for today. For our last show of this year, we're going to be talking about climate change, a very not heated topic whatsoever. So we're going to start off with sort of an interesting question. The climate change debate is very politically motivated, but some people argue that it shouldn't be a part of politics at all. What do you guys think about that?
Well, in the case of climate change and politics, there's also a very tenuous line in between politics and economics. The thing is about climate change is there's a bunch of problems with our world, not just the climate, but climate change is also a pretty big part of it. And that could be used to make money for certain corporations, and as a result, people get a bigger political hold and change the rules around and that kind of stuff. So you can also connect the three of climate change, economics, and politics.
I think climate change can definitely be used to wage, your audience, and it, in past elections it's been used, and it can be very divisive. Like, for liberals are known to be more about climate change and more about environmental friendliness, whereas Republicans it's kind of frowned upon for them. So I definitely think that it can be used and really polarized, and so I do think that it can be a very political issue.
Yeah, what do you think?
I think that because it is a political issue, it's just causing so many problems because right now politics are so black and white and the media is so either this side or that side. There's really no gray area. So it's tough because should it be a political issue? I don't really know.
If it's not a political issue, what else is it then?
I just think it's more of like these are hard and strong facts.
I think it's more of a moral and an economic issue, because I think you can separate economics from politics. Like, take, for example, all of the, a bunch of these major tech corporations, Apple, Google, all the others, have essentially said that they're going to abide with what they would have had to do under the Paris Climate Accords, even though the United States is going to be leaving the Paris Climate Accords in 2020. And that's going to make them, they're going to need to spend more money to do that, but they're willing to do that because it's sort of like maybe the morally responsible thing to do.
Well, in the case of climate change, that's a pretty global thing. It's not exclusively liberals, Democrats, Republicans, or really anybody. It's everybody. So if we bring politics into this, that could really just shift the focus on more politics, because politics tends to overwhelm a ton of stuff in this day and age, and shift it away from climate change. So if we're going to try and fix climate change, I say keep politics out of it.
I agree. I think we all need to kind of unite and take a stand together, because if one of us goes down, we all go down with it.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not just a single individual person.
I thought that was interesting about what you said about moral responsibility, and I think we're seeing a lot of that with different corporations. I think that kind of conversation has shifted, which I think is really interesting. And you definitely see a lot of corporations, becoming more environmentally friendly. We're getting more natural products, more environmentally friendly products and services in our world. So, but that's not dictated really by politics. So.
And why do you think that, you mentioned earlier that it's kind of frowned upon for conservatives to truly believe in environmentalism and climate change, but there are actually many economic positives to climate change, which that's one of the big reasons many conservatives don't support fixing climate change is the economics. Why do you think that's so?
Well, I think there's, back to what Izzy said, is there's a lot of debate over what is causing climate change. And so I think it's hard for certain people, certain views to see, if it's human made or if it's just the climate changing, because it is true, there are shifts in the climate, ice age and heat waves and things like that. I'm not an expert, but so I think that a lot of them do not believe in the facts that it is human caused, and I think that makes them believe that now it's the money that's a priority. So I can see both views on it, because I think that we do have, a priority to make sure that the economy is moving, and we can't, shift our focus to just the environment, because it's just not realistic at all.
What do you think is like the largest human contribution to climate change and global warming?
Well, I'd say that climate change has always been happening, but in this day and age, it's just been accelerated.
Exactly.
And that's what's scary about it. I would say CO2 emissions from all of this technology and industry that we've got going on, especially here in America, is a big cause of that. And it's also, in the case of climate change, why you might think, oh, if this is such a big issue, why aren't people working harder to fix it? And it's because there's money to be made. You have a problem, you can present a solution and make money off of that. And as long as that problem still remains, you can still keep making solutions out of it. I'm not saying that most corporations are that sinister-minded, but there is money to be made.
Is there money to be made in halting climate change, or do these companies only need to sort of shift their focus? Because take the solar industry, for example. It's growing at an enormous rate. There are currently over 250,000 people employed in the solar industry, which, if I'm correct, if the number I saw was correct, is 5 times the number of people employed in the coal industry. And there was a study published actually by a Michigan Technical University professor that says that if we were to retrain every person in the coal industry to work in the solar industry, it would cost $1.8 or $1.9 billion, which that might seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's almost nothing.
Right.
Should those kinds of alternatives be the things that we should look towards when trying to convince people that climate change is a thing we need to fix?
Well, if you're trying to get a group of people, a massive group of people, in fact, to try and follow this one thing, say converting to solar energy, not only is it the cost, like the monetary cost that you have to consider, it's also the fact that not everybody's going to want to do that for many reasons, not any that I can think of. But it's also the logistics of getting a collective group of people to agree on one thing and shift their mindset to something completely different. So maybe it's less about the monetary cost as much as how much of a pain is this going to be to get all these people to cooperate.
Yeah, but I think the question is like, is that pain, is that $1 billion worth it?
Well, I think there's a lot of money to be made in the sustainable energy field. And we're already seeing coal production go down. And obviously you're saying that there's less and less employed under the coal industry. And so I think that transition of energy is very possible.
Right.
But it's how expensive is it going to be in the flat rate, and how long is that going to take, and are we really seeing the benefits from solar energy? Like where are the statistics of is that a great idea and economically viable?
And to put that $1 billion in perspective, that number is less, if I'm correct in my math, less than 0.1% of the US's GDP.
Right.
Oh,
so
$1 billion is nothing in America.
It's almost nothing in America.
And that's another thing, is in America, we're almost number one. I think we are number one in reducing carbon emissions. So it's not like, we're not
doing anything.
Making progress, because we are. The problem that we're really seeing is in these foreign countries like China and Asia in general is we don't have to wear masks when we walk outside. And those countries where you do, I mean, that's where the real problem lies. And obviously I'm not saying that America is, completely, I guess, innocent in that, and we obviously have more progress to be made. But I mean, carbon emissions going down like 4% in the past few years, and it's actually really great progress, especially with more cars coming out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think another question is, what do you think is stopping a lot of companies from becoming eco-friendly?
I think there's a fear that it just is going to be too expensive, because obviously now the technology is a lot of money. So if we're looking at like Teslas and these hybrid cars, they're a lot more expensive. on average than, you know, your regular Honda that takes, or like, you know, your diesel gas car.
What do you think about that, Griffin?
Well, if you were to look at it from a business perspective, I guess, the way you get more money than your competitors is by having something that is better and different than theirs. So how much room is there for innovation in solar energy and all these renewable sources of energy, such as wind turbines and all of that stuff? How much room is there for you to get ahead in the economy? How much room is there for you to make more money than your competition?
Right.
And that is a big question, I suppose. I'm not an expert on economy, but that is something I'd be concerned about if I was going to switch, is that if I was originally somebody who was based around coal energy, that's something that people have been doing since, I believe, the industrial age, so like around the 20s, like 1910, right around that era. So that is just a big shift, and not a lot of people are big fans of change, and change is hard.
Right.
Yeah, sort of linking that back to just our recent conversation to politics. We mentioned earlier that we want to we think it might be a good idea to sort of remove politics from the climate debate. And major entrepreneurs and very wealthy people like Jeff Bezos, for example, he's worth over $100 billion, which means that spending $1.8 billion to retrain some people is barely going to make a dent in his wallet. Should we try to start appealing towards more of the private sector rather than the public sector?
I think that we could do both. I think you were talking about like taking politics out of it, but I think that that's what gives it attention in the positive and negative light. So, but I mean, attention is attention, whether it's it's good or bad. That's why we have the Kardashians who are so famous, you know, even though a lot of people hate them, a lot of people still love them. So I think that the kind of polarization of it is it can be good for, you know, in the positive light of pushing the progress of, you know, reducing emissions and stuff like that.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming onto our show. And that is it for the first half of MileHighDiscussions.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks. Thank you.
Learn what you love what you learn. Graduate debt-free from a certified program in health science, design, trades, or administration in less than a year. Opportunity comes from possibility. Come see what's possible.
Welcome back to Mile High Discussions. We have a new guest for our climate change talk today. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
I'm Hayden Christopher, and I'm a junior at East High School.
Great. So we talked in the previous half of our episode a lot about politics and sort of the heated debate of climate change, both literally and metaphorically. But we now want to talk about like the future, because climate change is really a future-oriented debate rather than a past. We can't really fix the past.
Right.
And one thing that a lot of people have been worried about recently is there's been a White House study as well as a UN study, in addition to the thousands of studies that have been published previously, talking about how climate change has actually accelerated, and we're facing things we would think we were going to face in 2050 now in 2030, which is only 12 years away, which is kind of crazy. Should we sort of accelerate our mindset as well?
I would argue that we should accelerate our mindset. I mean, by staying in the mindset that we are today, I mean, many people don't even believe that climate change exists right now. I mean, we're seeing the effects right now. Our generation is the first to see the effects, but the last to actually be able to stop climate change. And so by accelerating our mindsets to think towards the future and take preventative measures in order to stop climate change, I think is really the only way to tackle the problem.
Absolutely. What are you guys doing in your daily lives to kind of combat climate change?
I mean, one of the biggest things that we're doing in like Sustainability Club right now is just kind of vamping up the recycling program at East and composting and monitoring our energy levels. We just actually entered in an energy competition to see how much energy we use per month, and we're able to monitor that through an e-gauge that it was administered to us as well as South. And we're competing with South to see who can end up using the less amount of energy. And so we're able to see how much energy we actually use on a day-to-day basis, month-to-month basis. And we actually have tons of solar panels on top of the school as well. And so we're able to see what those solar panels actually bring to the school in terms of renewable energy. And we've had a couple meetings with the principal, and we're hoping to get more funding allocated to these solar panels on top of the school.
I think that's a good point was Izzy bringing up was, what is the effect that our individual lives or individual homes can make? So I'm just, I'm kind of curious on how like my recycling bin at home, how much does that actually really save in the long run? And we compost, but really not much. Like we have 2 gas guzzling cars, so what really, and no solar panels on my house. So it's, but what in the long run, what is each individual impact?
Well, yeah, I think it's hard to kind of focus on that right now because it's hard to really see and feel the dangers of climate change because it's hard to see it with our own eyes right now. And it won't be as hard in the future, and it's scary, but it's like hard to remember. I think it's easier to remember things that are right there in front of you. And I still take really long showers. And I drive a car, and I don't have solar panels on my house either. So I think that like mindset is really hard to get into, and I think that's the big reason for clubs like sustainability and how impactful they are.
I kind of feel like it's kind of like voting, like what does my vote count for? Because it's one in millions.
But if everyone does it, it makes a really great impact.
Yeah, exactly.
It really does.
Like a lot of people think that, if I don't drive my car, if I don't get solar panels, if I don't eat only sustainably grown food, then, it's not really going to make a difference because I'm just one person. But if you think about it, if you start doing that, and then you get a couple friends to start doing that, and then you implement it through a club, like Sustainability Club at a school at East High School, who has about 2,000 kids, and then they take it home to their families, you're really starting to branch out and have a really big impact.
Yeah, it's a good snowball effect, essentially, right?
Yeah.
But in the whole run of things, how much is that really going to impact? Because what we're seeing is emissions, from all the cars, and obviously no one's going to stop driving, but is from factories and more large-scale things. So that's what my doubt is what can one household and then end up being, it'll be thousands and thousands, but does that really help?
Well, I think it's known that going vegan is actually really environmentally friendly and is proven to be very, very impactful.
Yeah, overall, most of our not carbon emissions, but methane emissions and greenhouse gases are actually, they come from beef production and come from a lot of agriculture. We're actually seeing more pollution and more greenhouse gases come from agriculture than cars altogether.
Yeah. You both mentioned earlier about sort of how schools can help spread climate awareness and whatnot. And schools are kind of the developers of our future minds and future leaders. What would you guys think about creating, integrating climate change and knowledge into a school's curriculum?
Well, you already kind of see that nowadays. Obviously, there's clubs provided. There's classes, AP and Biro and things like that. But I think that it can be kind of, like I was saying earlier, it can be kind of polarizing and maybe biased possibly. So I think that you would have to be super meticulous in how you would implement that in your school program for teaching it. And I'm not, obviously there's facts out there, but it's how do you balance that with, but economically it's not possible, or tie that in.
What do you think about that, Hayden?
I definitely agree with Sophia. We do have clubs and we do have classes. But while we have these things, it's not mandatory. Only people who are really interested in making a change, and only people who are really interested in wanting to take those classes are able to take them. And I think that, possibly making them mandatory in a curriculum as maybe like a science class. I know lab-based sciences are required, but why isn't an AP Environmental Studies course? How much is someone going to use a lab science in their life, or how much are they going to use sustainable measures in order to keep the Earth and the world that they live in the same as they see it?
Yeah, and Sophia, you mentioned that it'd be hard to sort of implement a neutral stance into a class for climate change, but we're required to take a civics course, which is arguably kind of
Completely
it's
biased.
very biased.
I'm in it right now. Yes, absolutely.
So I think it'd be relatively reasonable to create, like, I don't know, a 6-month course or something, or like a semester-long course where you're given the facts, because there are facts, like straight facts. And then you also develop the course so that you want to allow people to create their own ideas. That's a big part of schools in general. You're formulating kids' ideas. And I think that'd be really valuable if kids started thinking about climate change when they were so young, and they could start implementing these like climate supporting like daily life things, like turning off the lights.
I agree, yeah. I mean, I think we've definitely reached the point past where, you know, people are claiming that, you know, climate change is fake. I mean, obviously we have numbers and research and tons of scientific provings in order to back that climate change is a real thing and having real measures in our society today. And I mean, you make a great point. If we're required to take a civics course and at, you know, certain high schools, those are obviously, you know, polarized one way or the other, then why aren't we required to take, you know, an AP environmental science course?
And on top of that, like, why aren't kids being more encouraged to go vegan and more encouraged to do these things? I mean, if veganism is so impactful, I know I don't eat meat, but that's like another, I guess not political, but if you don't eat meat or you don't eat those things, like, you tend to be judged by the people around you. If it's very impactful to our environment, I think maybe one of our first steps should be changing that stigma around that, because it can be really helpful.
Yeah.
I would actually disagree, though, with the requirement to take, you know, a climate change course, because in the long run, I don't think that that's not what's gonna make the change, right? Like I was saying earlier, it's at a bigger scale than that. So I do think that we need to be aware of it, just like I think we need to be aware of civics. And you know, civics is our government. We absolutely have to know about that, like we have a U.S. history course. But climate change, I think, is more of your own idea, and it's. So I would disagree with the stance that it has to be a required course. I think that it can be integrated in other courses. Like I learned about some of it in biology, and different things like that. But
I mean, you're only going to get so far learning about it, you know? If you're not going to make the change to, you know, go vegan, or not going to make the change to buy sustainably sourced food, and then, you know, you're not really going to make a change just by learning the information. And I think people, you know, are really scared to make these changes because, you know, everyone wants to see the effects of climate change kind of reversed, but no one wants to do the hard work, and no one wants to, you know, make the daily changes in their lives in order to see that kind of change. And I think that's why, you know, I mean, it scares the hell out of me that that no one really cares about climate change, because, you know, there's an iceberg melting off in Greenland that people in the U.S. are never going to see. Like, people are going to stay
feel
in
the effects,
yeah,
though.
exactly. Like, they're going to stay in their country. They're going to stay in the state that they live. They may
their
never go.
air-conditioned house.
Exactly. Like, they're never going to go to Greenland. They're never going to see the actual sea level rising. They're never actually going to see glaciers melting.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That sort of, it's hard to convince people who already have their own opinions. But also, if we start teaching 4-year-olds about climate change, that's going to be 14 years until they really can do something, which according to these new UN studies is going to be too late. So are we sort of trapped in, like, how do we convince people that already don't believe in climate change to do something about it? Or are we sort of just trapped into waiting until there's a new generation of people?
that kind of pulls back in politics because you know you're getting more we're getting stricter regulations, which is kind of the product of our own industrialization in the world. So I think that it's interesting to see that kind of more government control on it, and I think that that's really the only way that you're going to make people actually participate in these actions.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's definitely been government action as well, but I think there's been pullback with, the current administration pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords. I mean, while it doesn't go into effect until 2020, and we won't actually be pulled out until then, I mean, it still sends a message to the rest of America that, people don't really think climate change is a huge problem.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you guys think about there's new technology? I know I just saw this in the news some scientists built it kind of looks like a big snake in the ocean, and it
and it picks up trash
it?
with
Yes,
a net.
it's
That's super interesting.
It's super interesting, and it's things like those. It's like, why aren't we implementing this everywhere if it's so effective?
Yeah.
Well, so one thing is that, and I think that it can be a little hypocritical, is that there are a lot of movements. There's a lot of money pouring into climate change reversal technology like these things, and there's lots of money going into it. So it's not like it's a stopped problem. And like you were saying before, these trends of veganism and having solar panels on your roof, it's becoming a lot more popular. So I think that it does need to increase in the production of this technology. I don't know why that cool snake thing isn't implemented everywhere. I think it's just like a prototype for now, but I know they were trying to. But kind of back to your point is like, we did pull out of the Paris climate change, and I think that it's really hard for certain views to, especially like certain political stances are want less government control.
Absolutely.
And so they want to pull back regulations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming to MileHighDiscussions. Thank you so much, Hayden. Thank you so much, Sophia. No, you're fine. Don't forget to follow our social media at MileHighDiscussions on YouTube and Instagram. And thank you so much for listening.